we're talking about NACE competencies and resumes. So NACE is the National Association for Colleges and Employers, and is kind of the main source of information and collective collaboration within career services. And what they've outlined is kind of the 8 main things that students and people in job search mode in general should be preparing to be able to articulate and gain experience in are these competencies. What's great about these competencies is that they are not specific to any major, any job, any profession, and are really just what creates a well-rounded employee and worker. So as identified here, the 8 NACE competencies are career and self-development, leadership, communication, professionalism, critical thinking, teamwork, equity and inclusion, and technology. And what our role here as career champions is to do is to start talking with students about how do we get experience in these, how have we gotten experience in these, and most importantly, how do we articulate it on our resume? So when you're in conversations with your students, maybe one of the first things you do is you do a self-assessment. A lot of our students come in and they say, well, I haven't done anything, right? And we all know that's not entirely true, right? They've done things from part-time jobs to volunteer leadership work, to research, labs, group projects, other extracurricular activities. And through all of those mediums, there are ways that we can talk about these career competencies. So what I'm actually going to do for a minute, and I think I'm bringing over the right page. This is NACE's this is their website. This is their hub for their career readiness competencies. Here we're going to look at a couple of them, and just kind of right off the bat, I'll kind of like let y'all lead this conversation. Which one do you feel like you're the most confident in being able to talk about with students out of these 8? I think I heard somebody click off. So let's take a look at probably the one that we most engage with, across all disciplines, communication. So how are we communicating, right? Yes, there's that interpersonal communication, but that also includes active listening, right? Communicating in a clear and organized manner, not only in your conversations, but also in your work and how you present yourself. What's great about all these competencies is all of them are so intertwined together that you really can't have one without the other. So when we look at assessing our students holistically, we're all going to be at different points in these different competencies. And what's important is that we take that assessment and know where our strengths are and how that supports some of our areas for growth. I would encourage all of you, this will get sent out as well as a resource to explore some of these on their website. And I encourage you to start thinking about how you talk to students about what their goals are for their whole time at LSU. Can it be talked about through the lens of these NACE competencies that might help funnel some of those broader ideas down to some specific things. So as we get into resumes, I know we're all professionals and we all kind of know what resumes are, but what we need to do to prepare ourselves of how we talk about resumes with students. As career champions, you guys are kind of our first line of defense when helping students get those initial ideas of where do I find these resources? Where do I start with a resume? How do I get extra help once I've kind of made some progress? And that is great. As Blake said in the beginning, we'd love to be able to serve every single student, but there's, 20 some of us, and there's, 30,000, 40,000 students. So when we talk about resumes, obviously a resume is a full explanation of who I am, not just who I am as a person, right? Who am I as an employee to a potential employer? And it's not all about why am I the most qualified, right? When we think about where we go with our resumes, it's how do we tailor this specifically to the job or the experience that I want to get? So what makes a good resume? How do we make sure that we are making those connections and making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success? Being clean and consistent with professional formatting. Very often we see a lot of students kind of just go with the first template they find on whatever word processor they're using or on Google. We've got some great examples at the end as part of our resources, but also we're here to help every step of the way to work with whatever they're working with. Those strong bullet points, really articulating those competencies through strong action verbs, through context, through quantifying and qualifying, all of which we'll go into detail more in a couple slides. And then again, tailoring that resume to the specific experience that we're looking for. The main sections for what we need to make sure is at least a bare minimum on our students' resumes are the headers, our education sections, and our experiences. And those can go into as much or as little detail as the student has. So first, we're going to start off with the header. Pretty simple, a couple of quick notes just with things that we see in the field and with employers. As far as applicant tracking systems go, there are a couple things to keep in mind with your header. With your name, the name should always be at the top, of course, the largest and bold if that's your preference. But one thing we don't want to have students doing is doing all capital letters. I know that's pretty common across a lot of formats and templates that we've seen, but sometimes the computers have a tough time reading that. So whenever I see that on a resume, I just tell students, advise students against using it, since it doesn't really add anything and it could only really harm them in those situations. Full name, feel free to use a given name, feel free to use a legal name, really whatever you're the most comfortable with. I'd say as you go on throughout the rest of the process, you can give those legal names if that's going to be necessary for hiring paperwork and whatnot. But really, it's however you want to present yourself. Your phone number, your email address. Those are the three main things that you want to have in that section. I always suggest that LSU students use their LSU email address rather than their Google or iCloud or whatever other Yahoo's email addresses that they have, because at the end of the day, it's one more networking tool. Now, if they don't check their LSU email all the time, you're going to want to make sure that they are staying on that if they're sending out applications with those emails on it. But really, the more times that you can put LSU in front of an employer, the better, right? Other optional information, in the past, it may have been customary to add your full mailing address, or even as in this description, your city and state. It's really up to the student's comfortability. I would say at no point anymore do they need your full mailing address on there, and even your location, right? The reason we advise for or against is for a couple of reasons, mainly just because of the implicit bias that it could show, right? If I'm applying to a job in California, my resume says Baton Rouge, and me as the employer, I don't want to pay to have to relocate someone. Well, that might put one of our students at a disadvantage, where it's not really relevant to if I'm able to do the job. So that's why we would advise against it. Now, if I'm moving to California and I'm from California and I want to use my parents' home address, and I know I'm going to move back there when I graduate anyways, then maybe it is a good idea to put California in there in their resume header. So just some things to consider. Again, at the end of the day, it's probably not going to get you or not get you a job, but these are the kind of intricacies that, having known them, we can set our students up for more success. A LinkedIn website or a personal website or URL or a link to a portfolio or a GitHub. All those are definitely things that you can put on there in that header section as well. I would say if you do put your LinkedIn page on there, make sure you've personalized it and it's not Sam Press 876 lowercase b uppercase z 789. You can actually go into your personal profile settings and click edit and change it to whatever available combination of first name, last name, first name, last name, graduation year, just so you don't have that whole long string of URL on your resume. Any questions on headers? All right, just checking the chat. All right, awesome. So the next section is our education section. Again, there are some required things that are pretty standard that we want to make sure that we're talking about with our students. And then there's some other optional information that is up to the students in their specific situations. So, of course, first and foremost, you want to have LSU and your full degree title, not BS, BA, BM, what have you, spelled all the way out, Bachelor of Science of Chemical Engineering. Minors can go underneath that. And then Louisiana State University spelled all the way out with their city location, with our city location. When it comes to the graduation date, a lot of students feel that it might be necessary to put their start date and their end date or just their start date. But so long as you have your anticipated graduation date, that's really what's going to be most important to the employer. Then that's usually what we tell students to do. You don't really need to give a range because then again, that can construe some bias, if they want to, if you've been here for an extra year or if they don't want to hire people from a certain year class or class standing or age range, that could kind of put you in a negative. So just sticking with your anticipated graduation date is usually the best way to go with that. Concentration in minors, of course, as applicable. If they don't have any and they're using one of our examples, make sure that they delete it. We see a lot of students come in with minor and then nothing. Make sure that we're being detail oriented with our resumes as well. Some optional information, your GPA. The students do not have to put their GPA on their resume. If they want to, if it's something they're proud of, I would leave it up to the student and know that whatever they know to be competitive within their field is where they'll want to put their GPA on, right? So a 3.3 for one major might be very good. For another major, it might be less competitive. So just make sure the students are kind of aware of that and know that they can leave it off if they wish, and that they should put it on there if it's a great achievement. Related coursework and your thesis or dissertation title, if applicable. With your related coursework, I'd say one thing to be mindful of is you don't have to put every single course you've taken, but rather the ones that are going to be relevant to what position you're applying for. So this person's in chemical engineering. They've got some engineering classes, some design classes, some things that will let the employer know right off the bat that I have a specific set of knowledge that might be relevant to this job. That's the education section. Again, pretty straightforward. Any questions here? Anything new or surprising that like maybe we haven't seen before that or something we have seen that also has been in an education section that isn't in this example? So now we're going to move into the big meat and potatoes of this section of the resume, the experience section. So with our experience section, the first thing to keep in mind is that students have all kinds of experience, and there's no reason why you need to limit yourself to just one experience section. We do this for a couple reasons. One, students have work experience, students have leadership experience, volunteer experience, lab and research experience, and other relevant experience. And in our resumes, we want to make sure that we are setting students up to be viewed as employers as easily as possible. So there's a way to divide up how do I get my hostess job away from my research job that I really want to talk more about. And that's through having specific experience sections. Within those sections, you're going to want to make sure that you clearly identify your title. In this example, human resources intern, and what the employer is for reference, for understanding of context, the location of where that is, as well as the date range of when they started to present or to when they completed that assignment. In those sections, right, we really want to make sure that we're using the bulleted statement, bullet points format. Sometimes we see people might want to write more narratively, but the bullet points are really the tried and true example to really articulate clearly and concisely what do we need to do. And we're going to talk about that on this next slide. So what do we put in these bullet points? These are going to be tasks that you've completed during this role, skills that you've used, accomplishments or impacts that you've had. Really going back to those career readiness competencies that we looked at earlier, using that as a starting point of how have I displayed these things and how do I articulate that through my specific experience, through my internship, through my part-time job, through my volunteer leadership role. A strong bullet point should include a strong action verb at the beginning. As we saw in that last example, experienced, discussed, led, etc. Some context and a result. The acronym we use for that is CAR. So starting with that strong action verb, followed by any incorporating processes or methods that you did that action verb, right? And then lastly, what was the result of doing that task? It's also important to quantify and qualify wherever you can. So qualify, again, talking about the specific processes and methods that you did those verbs, right? But also quantifying using numbers, percentages, money to, again, give deeper context into what exactly you did. Instead of saying led a team of 10. Instead of saying raised money, raised $10,000. Giving that context kind of answers those initial questions and gives some scope into what exactly your responsibilities are. So again, down here, we've got some example bullet points. Served a table section with the capacity for up to 25 guests at a time. Communicated menu options to guests to ensure satisfaction and avoidance with food allergens. Regularly upsold $500 worth of appetizers and meal upgrades per month. I'm sure we can all imagine what that would look like without this quantification and qualification. It would look like served tables, talked about menu options, and sold appetizers. By giving this specific context, it really helps the student really showcase their skill set that they've gotten during their experiences. So other sections that you can optionally add, this one's for a project section. You would essentially just do the same thing that we did for the experience section, but through the lens of the project. It can be broken down however you really want to, as far as if you had multiple roles on that project, you could do it kind of like a, what's the word I'm looking for? A executive summary page within different descriptions of the different roles. But yeah, essentially the same as the other ones, just other areas to go into more detail of specific projects within your roles. And then, of course, we've all seen at the bottom, the skills, honors, and activities section. This can be a combination of them. They can be all individual sections. But one thing that we want to keep in mind in this section is that these are specific to certain technologies, certain certifications, certain things that they've done. So what it's not is it's not I'm a good listener, or I'm a hard worker, or I'm extremely motivated, or leadership skills. What it is experience on Microsoft Excel, Photoshop, C++, any other specific tools to their program or to where they might need to have experience in. Languages, you can put whatever languages to whatever comfortable you feel sharing, right? If you want to put, native English speaker, sure. If you want to add that you are conversational or fluent in another language, or that you're learning a new language, that can all show different levels of ability to learn new things. And that might be something that you want to share. Don't feel like it has to be that you're 100% fluent in all these languages. Additionally, with those technologies and skills, feel free to put whatever you want on there and give qualifiers to them. So if you want to say you're advanced in C++, but you're basic in Photoshop, that's fine, especially going back to those applicant tracking systems that we talked about earlier. Having Photoshop on your resume might be important to making it through that system. And even though you're not going to lead projects in Photoshop, you want to show that you have that basic understanding, or at least that knowledge of what Photoshop is. And then when you get to the job, you can then learn and hone those skills a little bit more, just by giving the qualification of basic on there. Honors, of course, make sure that if they are region specific, or something that may not be known to the unfamiliar eye, that you do give a little bit of context to those honors. We kind of know essentially what Dean's List is. Tops, when they just write tops, that's not necessarily something that everybody understands across the board. So spelling it out, if it's an acronym, Taylor Opportunity Program for students. And then of course, other activities. One personal point of privilege I'll point out here is they've got their sorority or fraternity, sorority there, Delta Kappa, in their activity section, where I would argue that could go in a leadership section, or an experience section, or a volunteer section. I see so many Greek students that want to leave this off of their resume, and it's really, really a great conversation starter. It's a great way to show those competencies that we talked about. So if that is something that you come in contact with, I would definitely please ask that you advocate for them to put that in their experience sections. So next and last, we're going to talk about our resume review process here within the Career Center. All students have access to create a Handshake account. And if they're applying for on-campus jobs or jobs in general, or internships through Handshake, they'll actually have to get a resume approved through our system. So if you have students that know that they're going to be applying for jobs, make sure that they're not waiting to the last minute, because if they do not have their resume approved, they may have their application go in late. So what we do in this process is we review it for a few couple of things, mainly to ensure that they have those three main sections, the header, the experience section, and the education section. And we make sure that it is at least a resume, that it serves the function of a resume. Just because it gets approved does not mean it's necessarily a good resume or a competitive resume. It just means that it is going to meet our bare minimum standards to be seen by an employer. If it doesn't meet those standards, it will get rejected, and they'll get some comments and some feedback of what they need to change to get it approved. And then they can resubmit it, of course, whenever they make those changes. What we offer in services for resumes is a whole bunch. We offer workshops, as far as group workshops where we'll give a presentation and help them work through their resume. We offer drop-ins 1 to 4, Monday through Friday, where students can just come in without an appointment and say, hey, can someone look at my resume? And we'll give it about a 10-15 minute look over with some feedback. We do email critiques. We also do appointments as well, as a need by need basis for resumes. But most of our students find success in these drop-in sessions or workshops to kind of get that first help that they need. Then, of course, with all of you and all of your expertise, we can make them even stronger.